There are moments in life that define us, not the loud, celebrated victories, but the quiet, desperate whispers in the dark when everything seems lost. This is a story about one of those moments. A story about a man who had lost everything: his pride, his family, and his hope. And it's about the 50 cents that stood between him and the end of his world. What he didn't know was that this single insignificant coin was about to purchase a miracle. The West Texas wind was a constant, unwelcome companion, sweeping dust across the empty auction yard as Jake Evans counted the crumpled bills and loose change in his pocket one last time. It wasn't much, $43.50. He separated the two quarters from the rest, their metallic shine a stark contrast to the faded, worn-out paper bills. That small handful of metal was all that stood between him and complete, irreversible ruin. The bank's final notice sat on his kitchen table back at the ranch, its bold black letters a death sentence for his family's legacy. 60 days. That's all the time he had left to come up with 3 months of missed mortgage payments. 60 days until the 800-acre ranch, the very land his great-grandfather had settled, the soil that held the sweat and dreams of 4 generations of his family, would be seized and sold off to the highest bidder. At 45, Jake looked like a man who had lived 2 lifetimes of hardship. The ranch, located just outside Abilene, had been struggling for years, but the last 18 months had been a catastrophe. A perfect storm of collapsing cattle prices and skyrocketing feed costs had wiped him out. He'd been forced to sell off most of his herd at a devastating loss, watching generations of careful breeding, his father's life's work, disappear onto slaughterhouse trucks for pennies on the dollar. Each sale felt like he was selling a piece of his own soul. His wife, Maria, had left 6 months ago. She'd packed her bags and taken their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, to live with her sister in Fort Worth. The silence she left behind was louder than any argument they'd ever had. "I can't watch you kill yourself for a dream that's already dead, Jake," she had said, her voice devoid of the warmth he once knew. Now the only communication he received were Lily's crayon drawings in the mail, vibrant pictures of a happy family on a green ranch that felt like a world away. Each drawing was a beautiful, painful reminder of the life he could no longer provide. So now Jake came to the livestock auction every Wednesday. It wasn't to buy. He couldn't afford a bag of feed, let alone a new animal. He came to watch. It was a masochistic ritual, a self-inflicted punishment that reminded him of everything he'd lost. He sat on the weathered bleachers, a ghost among the living, as lot after lot of healthy cattle and strong horses were sold. Each crack of the auctioneer's gavel was another nail in the coffin of the life that was slipping through his fingers. He watched men with clean boots and confident smiles make deals, their easy laughter echoing in the vast, empty space of his own failure. Suddenly, the auctioneer's voice, usually booming with enthusiasm, dropped to a near monotone. "All right, folks, next up is Lot 73. There was a pause, a hesitation that caught Jake's attention. "We have a quarter-horse filly, approximately 4 months old. Dam is deceased. Owner has surrendered her. We're selling her as is. Where is?" Jake leaned forward, his gaze drawn to the entrance of the ring. A handler let in the most heartbreaking, sorry excuse for a horse he had ever witnessed. The foal was so small, so utterly frail, she barely reached the man's waist. Her coat was a mottled, muddy color, caked with dried manure and filth. Patches of fur were missing where mange had taken hold, leaving raw, pink skin exposed. She was painfully thin, a walking skeleton draped in skin. Every rib was starkly visible, her hip bones jutting out like sharp coat hangers. One of her eyes was crusted completely shut with a thick yellow infection, and she limped heavily on her right front leg, placing the hoof down with a wince of pain. She looked more dead than alive, a fragile specter swaying on her feet. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and brutal. A wave of murmurs, a mix of pity and disgust, rippled through the stands. People turned away, shaking their heads. A few men in the front row laughed cruelly. "Someone ought to put that thing out of its misery," one of them muttered, loud enough for several people to hear. "Let's start the bidding at $20. The auctioneer tried, his voice lacking any conviction. The yard was met with a heavy, deafening silence. $10 then? Can I get $10 for her?" Nothing. The only sound was the relentless wind. People were already looking at their phones, checking the time, waiting for this pathetic display to be over. $5? The auctioneer's voice had gone flat. He just wanted it to be over. Folks, I've got to sell this filly. Give me $1. Just $1. Still, there was nothing. The handler stood in the center of the ring looking embarrassed, holding the lead rope of a foal that seemed ready to collapse at any moment. Finally, the auctioneer let out a long, weary sigh. All right, 50 cents, he said, his voice barely a whisper. 50 cents, or she goes straight to the killers. Do I hear 50 cents? Something made Jake look closer. He saw past the filth, the sickness, the starvation. Despite her condition, or maybe because of it, there was something in the way she held her head. Even sick and starving, even with one eye swollen shut, she wasn't cowering. There was a flicker of defiance, a quiet dignity that seemed impossible given her circumstances. And then, her one good eye, a deep, intelligent brown, scanned the crowd, and for a fleeting second, it locked onto Jake's. In that instant, he felt a jolt, a profound and inexplicable sense of recognition, as if a voice only he could hear was crying out for help. His hand went up before his brain could protest, before he could think about the absurdity of it, before he could remind himself that he had no money for vet care, no extra feed, and no business taking on another burden. It was a reflex, an impulse born from a place of shared brokenness. The auctioneer saw the movement and seized the opportunity to end the miserable affair. 50 cents to the gentleman in the back, he said quickly, his voice filled with relief. He didn't even ask for another bid. He slammed the gavel down with a sharp crack. Sold! As Jake made his way down the bleachers, his heart pounding in his chest, he could feel the eyes of the crowd on him. He heard the whispers, the judgments. They thought he was either crazy or cruel, and in that moment, he thought they were probably right. But as he reached the ring and gently took the frayed lead rope from the handler, the tiny foal leaned her head against his leg for just a second. A silent acknowledgement. In that small gesture, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. A sense of purpose. Now, before we find out what happens to this 50-cent foal, we want to ask you something. Think about a time you felt completely hopeless, a moment when you thought all was lost. What was the one small thing that gave you the strength to keep going? Share your story with us in the comments below. Your experience could be the sign of hope that someone else needs to see today. And while you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because the journey this man and this foal are about to take is a story of survival, destiny, and a miracle that you will not want to miss. As Jake walked down from the bleachers, the weight of 100 judgmental eyes felt heavier than the Texas sun. He heard the whispers, the snickers, the mutters of crazy fool and wasting his time. Every step toward the ring was a walk of shame, a public display of his own desperation. He was a man who couldn't afford to feed himself, now the proud owner of a dying animal. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. He handed the 2 quarters to the auction clerk, the coins feeling cold and insignificant in his palm. The clerk didn't even look him in the eye, just stamped the receipt and pushed it toward him, eager to move on. When he reached the center of the ring, the handler, a young man with tired eyes, handed him the frayed lead rope. Good luck, the handler said, his voice a mixture of pity and disbelief. She's gonna need it. Jake simply nodded, his throat too tight to form words. He gently tugged on the rope, and the tiny foal took a hesitant, painful step, her frail body trembling with the effort. He named her penny right then and there. It wasn't just because of the price he paid. It was a reminder that even something as small and overlooked as a single penny could have value, could be the start of something more. It was a name that held a silent promise. The journey from the ring to his old, battered pickup truck was an ordeal. It couldn't have been more than 100 yards, but for Penny, it was a marathon. She limped heavily, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Twice, her legs buckled and she nearly collapsed. Each time Jake was there, his hand steady on her back, murmuring soft, encouraging words. Easy now, girl. Just a little further. We're almost there. People stopped to stare at the pitiful sight. The broken-down man and his broken-down horse. Jake ignored them, focusing only on the fragile life tethered to his hand. Getting her into the rusty horse trailer was another challenge. The ramp was too steep, her legs too weak. She tried once, stumbled and slid back down, her eyes wide with fear. Jake knew forcing her would only terrify her more. So with a gentleness he didn't know he still possessed, he knelt down, wrapped his arms around her skeletal frame, feeling every sharp rib against his chest, and lifted her. She weighed next to nothing, a bundle of bones and matted fur. He carefully placed her inside on a thin layer of old straw, the last of his supply. The 15-mile drive back to his ranch was the longest of his life. He drove at a crawl, no faster than 15 miles per hour, his eyes glued to the rearview mirror. Every bump in the road, every slight jostle sent a jolt of fear through him. He was terrified that the fragile creature in the back would be broken by the journey. He could see her swaying unsteadily, a tiny silhouette against the setting sun. He was transporting not just a horse, but the last flickering ember of his own compassion. When he finally pulled up to the small, dilapidated barn, his one remaining horse, an old gelding named Buck, watched with mild curiosity. Buck was a relic of the ranch's better days, too old to be sold, a loyal companion in Jake's solitude. Jake led Penny out of the trailer and into an empty stall. He used the last of his hay not for feed, but to make her a thick, soft bed, a luxury she had clearly never known. He filled a shallow pan with water, as she seemed too weak to lift her head to a proper bucket. She drank greedily, her small body shaking. That first night Jake didn't go back to the main house. He couldn't. The house was no longer a home. It was a museum of his failures, its rooms echoing with the ghosts of laughter and love. The silence in there was suffocating, so he grabbed an old blanket from his truck and made a bed for himself on a pile of hay just outside Penny's stall. He told himself it was to monitor her condition, to be there if she took a turn for the worse. But the truth was simpler and more profound. In the quiet darkness of the barn, with the gentle sounds of horses breathing and the comforting scent of hay and earth, he didn't feel quite so alone. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of his solitude lifted, just a little. Listening to Penny's soft, rhythmic breaths was a lifeline in the vast ocean of his despair. He woke with a start every few hours, his heart pounding, convinced she had stopped breathing. Each time he would peer through the slats of the stall to see her small form, still there, still fighting. She survived the night. Then another, then a week. Each sunrise that found her still standing was a small, personal victory for Jake. He couldn't afford a veterinarian, so he became one. He drew on the deep well of knowledge passed down from his grandfather, a man who believed that patience and nature were the best healers. He gently cleaned Penny's infected eye twice a day with warm salt water, flushing away the sickness until, slowly, the swelling went down and a bright, intelligent eye was revealed. He treated the angry patches of mange with an old cowboy remedy, a mixture of sulfur and lard. It was messy and it smelled awful, but it worked. The itching subsided, and the raw skin began to heal. Feeding her was a delicate science. He knew her starved system couldn't handle a large meal, so he fed her small amounts of watered-down milk replacer every few hours, day and night. It was exhausting work, but with each feeding he saw a little more life return to her eyes. He would gently walk her around the small paddock twice a day, his arms supporting her, slowly building strength in that injured leg. He talked to her constantly, his voice a low, soothing rumble. He told her about the ranch, about his daughter Lily, about the dreams he once had. He wasn't just nursing a horse. He was nursing his own wounded spirit. Before we witness the incredible transformation that is about to unfold, we have a question for you, a question that goes to the heart of this story. Think about a time you took a chance on something or someone that everyone else had given up on. It could be a rescue animal, a struggling friend, or a project everyone said would fail. What was it, and why did you choose to believe when no one else would? Share your story in the comments section below. Your act of faith could inspire someone else to do the same. And please, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You have seen the beginning of this journey, but where it leads is a destination of hope and fortune that you will have to see to believe. The passing of the seasons across the Texas plains marked the slow, miraculous journey of Penny's recovery. The harsh, dry summer gradually gave way to a milder autumn, and with it, the last traces of the broken creature Jake had brought home disappeared forever. The transformation was not just remarkable, it was breathtaking. The patchy, mange-ridden coat she arrived in was shed, and in its place grew a coat of pure silk and fire. It was a deep, lustrous chestnut, so rich it seemed to glow like a burning coal in the golden light of the setting sun. The perfect white star on her forehead, once hidden by filth, now shone brightly, a beacon of her renewed life. The limp that had crippled her was now a distant memory, replaced by a stride that was both powerful and impossibly graceful. She moved with a liquid ease, her steps confident and sure, a testament to the patient care Jake had poured into her. Jake found a new rhythm to his days, a purpose that had been absent for so long. His mornings were no longer filled with dread, but with the simple, rewarding tasks of caring for Penny. He'd watch her in the pasture, her head held high, her ears pricked forward, taking in the world with a bright, insatiable curiosity. She was not just healed, she was vibrant. Most horses that endure such neglect become fearful, skittish, and untrusting. Penny was the opposite. She was bold, affectionate, and possessed a quiet confidence that seemed woven into her very being. She would follow Jake around the ranch like a shadow, nuzzling his hand for a reassuring touch, her intelligent eyes watching his every move. The bond between them deepened into a silent, perfect understanding. She was the first thing he thought of in the morning and the last thing he checked on at night. But the true, astonishing secret of her nature, the gift that lay dormant within her, was revealed on a blustery Tuesday afternoon. Jake's neighbor, a wealthy and influential rancher named Arthur Thompson, was in a state of panic. Thompson was a man who prided himself on his prize-winning livestock and immaculate operation. But that day, his prize bull, a formidable Charolais worth tens of thousands of dollars, had smashed through a fence and was now running wild across Jake's property. The bull was a mountain of muscle and fury, and Thompson and his two ranch hands had been trying to corral it for hours, their efforts proving futile and increasingly dangerous. They were exhausted, frustrated, and at their wits' end. Jake had been mending a fence line when the commotion started. Penny, now a healthy and spirited 1-year-old, was grazing peacefully in the adjacent pasture. As the enraged bull charged past, a whirlwind of dust and snorting fury, Penny's head shot up. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her playful curiosity was replaced by an intense, laser-like focus. Her ears swiveled forward, her body went taut, and she watched the chaos unfold not with fear, but with an almost analytical calm. Then, without any command from Jake, without any training or prompting, she sprang into action. She exploded from her calm stance, her hooves thundering against the dry earth. She moved with a speed and agility that left Jake breathless. But this wasn't a panicked chase. It was a calculated, strategic dance. She didn't run at the bull. She flowed around it. When the bull veered left, Penny was already there, a chestnut blur, cutting it off with a sharp, precise turn. When it tried to break right, she mirrored its movement perfectly, anticipating its every thought before the bull itself seemed to know its own mind. She lowered her head, pinning the massive animal with her intelligent gaze, guiding it, pressuring it, using an innate understanding of leverage and psychology that trainers spend a lifetime trying to instill in their horses. Within 5 minutes, the exhausted, bewildered bull was trotting meekly back through the broken fence and into its own pasture. Penny stopped at the fence line, snorted once as if to say, "Job done," and calmly went back to grazing. Jake, Thompson, and his ranch hands stood frozen, their mouths agape. They had just witnessed something impossible. Arthur Thompson, a man not easily impressed, slowly walked over to the fence, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at Penny. He took off his expensive Stetson hat and wiped the sweat from his brow. "In all my life," he said, his voice raspy with awe, 40 years in the horse business, from Kentucky to California, I have never ever seen anything like that. That wasn't a horse chasing a bull. That was a master at work." He turned to Jake, his eyes filled with a new respect. "That instinct, that cow sense, you can't train that into a horse. That's born. That's genetics. That's a bloodline. Where in God's name did you get her, Jake?" A slow smile spread across Jake's face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "She cost me 50 cents at the auction last year." Thompson stared first at Jake, then back at the magnificent filly, and then let out a booming laugh of pure astonishment. 50 cents? Son, you didn't buy a horse. You stole a masterpiece. He was captivated, his breeder's mind racing. He saw something in Penny's conformation, in the powerful set of her haunches and the intelligent look in her eye, that sparked a wild theory. It was a long shot, a near impossible connection to a legend from the past. He insisted, offering to pay for a full genetic panel. "I have a hunch, Jake, a crazy one. We need to know who this horse is." Jake, intrigued and trusting the older man's expertise, agreed. He took a sample of Penny's hair and sent it off to a specialized lab in Kentucky. The weeks that followed were filled with a nervous anticipation. A small, fragile seed of hope had been planted in Jake's heart, and he was terrified it wouldn't grow. He tried not to think about it, focusing on his daily routines, but the question lingered in the air. "Who are you, Penny?" The day the results arrived, it was in a thick, official-looking envelope. Jake's hands trembled as he opened it. He scanned the technical jargon, his eyes searching for something he could understand. And then he saw it. A name that made the world stand still. The report confirmed that Penny was a direct, lineal descendant of King's Legacy, a legendary champion racehorse from the 1970s. King's Legacy was a Triple Crown contender whose career was cut short by injury, and his specific most prized bloodline was thought to have been completely lost to a barn fire 2 decades ago. Breeders had mourned the loss of those genetics, believing them to be gone from the world forever. But they weren't. They were here. They were standing in his pasture. Penny wasn't just a good horse with sharp instincts. She was living history. She was carrying the genetic blueprint of one of the greatest champions the world had ever seen. She was a priceless living miracle. Jake sank to his knees in the dusty yard, the papers clutched in his hand, and he laughed. It was a laugh that started deep in his chest and erupted into the open air, a sound of disbelief, of joy, and of overwhelming, earth-shattering hope. The 50-cent foal wasn't just his salvation. She was a legend reborn. The news of Penny's bloodline didn't just ripple through the horse world. It hit it like a tidal wave. The story was electric, the kind of mythic tale that breeders and racers usually only dream about. A lost legendary bloodline, believed to have vanished in fire and tragedy, had been rediscovered in the most unlikely of places. A dusty, forgotten auction, bought for the price of a cheap soda. Phone calls began to flood Jake's old crackling landline. The callers were not local ranchers anymore. They were the titans of the industry. Names he had only ever read about in glossy magazines were now leaving urgent messages on his answering machine. They were breeders from Kentucky, oil barons from Dubai, and racing syndicates from Europe. They all wanted the same thing, a piece of the miracle. The offers were staggering beyond anything Jake could have ever comprehended. They didn't want to buy Penny. They knew a man who had slept in a barn to save her would never sell her. They wanted her future. They wanted her offspring. The first serious offer came from a Kentucky breeding syndicate. They offered Jake $1 million, cash, for the rights to her first foal. Jake stared at the number on the contract, his vision blurring. It was a figure so large it felt fictional, a dream he was afraid he would wake up from. With a trembling hand, he signed the papers. In that single moment, the crushing weight of debt that had haunted him for years evaporated. The ranch was saved. The notice from the bank became a meaningless piece of paper. The legacy of his family was secure, but that was only the beginning. Penny's story was too good, too pure to stay within the confines of the racing world. It was a modern-day fable, and it captured the public's imagination. News crews arrived at the ranch, their vans a strange sight against the backdrop of old oak trees. Newspapers ran headlines like, "The 50-Cent Miracle," and "The $1 Million Penny." Jake, a man who had hidden from the world in his own failure, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. He was uncomfortable with the attention, but he spoke with a quiet humility that only made people love the story more. He always said the same thing. "I didn't do anything special. I just saw a creature that needed a second chance." His newfound fame, and more importantly, His gentle, patient approach to horsemanship attracted a different kind of interest. People didn't just want a horse from him. They wanted to learn from him. They saw the incredible bond he shared with Penny, a partnership built on trust and respect, not dominance. He started a small training program, not because he wanted to build an empire, but because he wanted to honor the lessons Penny had taught him. He called his philosophy the Baker Method, a nod to his family's name. It was a method based on observation, patience, and allowing a horse's natural instincts to guide its training. It became a revolutionary success. The money from the first foal and the income from his burgeoning training business allowed Jake to begin rebuilding. He didn't just pay off the mortgage. He started to heal the ranch itself. New safe fences replaced the old rotting ones. The dilapidated barn was torn down and replaced with a beautiful state-of-the-art facility, with spacious, airy stalls and automatic waterers. The parched pastures were irrigated and seeded, and soon they were covered in a blanket of lush green grass. The ranch was reborn just as Penny had been. One day, amidst this whirlwind of change, the phone rang. It wasn't a breeder or a reporter. It was Maria. Her voice was hesitant, soft. She had seen him on the news. She had read about Penny. She asked if she and Lily could come visit just for a weekend. When they arrived, Maria stood in the driveway, looking at the transformed ranch, and then at Jake. He was a different man from the one she had left. The despair in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence and a deep sense of peace. That weekend visit led to long conversations under the stars, conversations about what had gone wrong, about the pain and the fear, and about the possibility of a new beginning. They didn't just fall back in love. They built a new love, one stronger and more resilient than before. Maria and Lily came home. The silence in the house was finally filled with laughter again. 5 years after that fateful day at the auction, Jake Evans was a multimillionaire. The Baker Ranch was one of the premier equestrian centers in the country. Penny's foals were champions, each one selling for 7 figures, their victories adding to their mother's legendary status. But for Jake, the true measure of his wealth had nothing to do with the numbers in his bank account. One cool evening, 6 years after it all began, Jake stood leaning against a fence, watching Penny graze in the main pasture. She was no longer the fragile foal he could lift in his arms, but a magnificent matriarch, the queen of the ranch. Her third foal, a spirited filly with the same chestnut coat and intelligent eyes, played at her side. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Maria came and stood beside him, wrapping an arm around his waist. Lily was nearby, giggling as she tried to coax the new foal into playing with her. The scene was one of perfect, profound peace. "You know what's wild?" Jake said softly, his eyes never leaving Penny. "If even one other person at that auction had bid $1, none of this would have happened. I only had 50 cents to my name. I was at the absolute end of the line." Maria rested her head on his shoulder. "But no one else saw what you saw, Jake." He shook his head, a small, humble smile on his face. "I didn't see anything, Maria, not really. I didn't see a champion or a $1 million bloodline. I just saw something that was as broken as I was. I just felt something, like she was meant to be here, with me." As if hearing her name, Penny looked up. She walked over to the fence and gently pressed her forehead against Jake's chest, a nightly ritual of affection and gratitude that never failed to fill his heart. Despite the fame, the wealth, and the acclaim, she was still just the horse who remembered the man who gave her a chance when the entire world had turned its back. "Best 50 cents anyone ever spent," Maria whispered, scratching Penny behind the ears. Jake looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the thriving ranch around him, and then back at the magnificent horse before him. "She didn't just save the ranch," he corrected gently. "She saved me." The world had been transformed by Penny's influence. But for Jake, standing in that field with his family, the real wealth wasn't measured in dollars or trophies. It was measured in second chances. The chance Penny got to live, the chance he got to save his family's legacy, and the chance they both got to prove that true worth isn't determined by a price tag, but by the courage to see value where no one else does. If this story of hope and redemption moved you, we ask you to do one small thing. Share this video with someone in your life who needs a reminder that every ending can become a new beginning. And before you go, make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have hit that notification bell so you never miss another incredible story that proves miracles can be found in the most unexpected places. Finally, go back to the comments and read the stories shared by our community. Stories of hope, of faith, of second chances. Because just like Jake and Penny showed us, sometimes the things we choose to rescue end up rescuing us right back. Thank you for watching.